the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome video. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Wednesday, April 24th. As you can see, I'm back home after a very quick trip to New York. So here we are. No great New York City meals, partially because I was there on Monday night and Monday restaurants are closed, but also just because busy running around. All right. First, for those of you on YouTube, I'll just point out something you might have noticed already. I don't know. Lighting is different. Little changes to setup. Again, I'm curious what you think. We've got some background light and everything's lit differently. So I'm curious what you think about this and whether you give it a thumbs up or not. All right, let me know. All right, we have got a full program today, and we got a lot to cover. We're going to talk about a bunch of things in the news, and then as part of that, we will then talk about another item in the news, which is the Colombia demonstrations, in much more depth, and we will also, depending on how much time we have, if we have time, we can also talk about the prospects for peace in the Middle East. There's a big topic for you, and just some thoughts about that that I have, some new stuff that I got. So buckle up, a lot of news, and I don't think any of it is very good. So it is what it is. So we're gonna jump right into that. Reminder: those of you watching live on YouTube can participate in helping the show, in funding the show by using the super chat, both to ask questions, to guide the show's direction, to bring up topics you want me to talk about, and also to support the show value for value, as we always did. And of course, those of you who are listening after the fact, if you would like to support the show, you can do so on YouTube with an applause, but you can also, and maybe more meaningfully, you can support the show with a monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon is very easy to set up, very smooth, and it's just a monthly contribution. And then also you can do it on yaronbrookshow.com/support, which is basically PayPal. Same thing. You can set up a monthly contribution and it works. Silvanos, thank you. Ryan, thank you. Vadim, thank you. Particularly Silvanos for the $50. Thanks for getting us up to a roaring start, guys. All right, so this morning, President Biden signed the bill that provides aid to Ukraine. I think, was it $63 billion? And to Israel and to Taiwan, all military aid. These bills are all structured in a way that the money flows back to the U.S. in terms of purchases of military equipment, or a lot of the aid is just in-kind purchases of military equipment. So there's already a lot of U.S. weapons set up on the border in Poland, on the border with Ukraine, ready to go. My estimation is as soon as Biden signed the bill, trucks were already starting to move all that military equipment that was set up on the border with Poland in Ukraine into Ukraine. And Ukraine should be getting about $1 billion worth of military equipment. It's not clear how you value what $1 billion means in this context, maybe replacement cost. But that's a lot of equipment. Ukraine is, of course, in desperate need of this. Russia has made significant advances at huge cost, but Russia doesn't seem to care about costs. It has made significant progress on the Eastern Front in Donetsk. Ukraine, a lot of this is a consequence of the fact that Ukraine was running out of artillery shells, running out of equipment. It's also running out of soldiers, which is a whole other issue we can get into at some point. Anyway, all this equipment is heading Ukraine's way. Hopefully it's not too late. Hopefully it's in time to bolster Ukraine's defenses and make it possible for it to hold off the Russians. The Russians also planning what I think will be a major offensive in the spring and in the summer. They want to take, and they've said they want to take the city of Kharkiv, which they couldn't even do the first round. Yeah, so it's going to get very bloody, very hot in Ukraine this spring and the summer, and these additional weapon systems, additional artillery shells, and everything else is incredibly valuable for Ukraine's efforts to hold off against a brutal, barbaric aggressor, which is Russia, that is intent on basically, occupying all of Ukraine and ultimately, or at least all of eastern Ukraine, and ultimately including Kiev, and ultimately incorporating that into Greater Russia, or setting up a puppet regime in Kiev that is a Russian puppet regime instead of the existing government there. So that was signed in. Republicans held that up about 6 months. Very, 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 very costly political whatever. I don't know what you even want to call it. At the end of the day, it looks like Trump sided with the aid package and sided with Johnson, and ultimately put the pressure on to get this done. Half the Republicans in the House voted for it, half of it voted against it. In the Senate, I think a majority voted for it, but still a significant number of Republicans voted against it, including Ted Cruz and, of course, Rand Paul. Rand Paul always votes against these kind of things. So it is interesting to see this realignment within the Republican Party and its views on foreign policy. It'll be interesting to see how this evolves. It'll be interesting to see if Trump wins, what exactly his foreign policy is going to be. It's very, at this point, very unpredictable, very difficult to forecast, very difficult to tell. As part of the the urgency was Ukraine. I think Israel, there's no urgency with regard to Israel, and there's no real urgency with regard to Taiwan, not yet anyway. But the very fact that aid to Taiwan was approved, I think, is a strong signal vis-a-vis China. And hopefully the kind of weapon systems that the United States starts selling the Taiwanese are the kind of weapon systems that really make the Chinese think twice or three times about invading Taiwan, about being the aggressor on that side. All right. As part of this, Biden also signed today a bill that basically requires TikTok to divest. Well, BitDance, the parent company, the Chinese parent company of TikTok, to divest TikTok US and to sell it, I guess, to an American company or to a non-Chinese company. You can expect that TikTok will immediately sue on free speech grounds and other grounds. And that case might very well end up in front of the Supreme Court down the road. So nothing is going to happen in terms of the sale of TikTok anytime soon. It's likely that this will be in the court system for quite a while. You know my view on this, that this is ridiculous. It's a distraction. It has nothing to do with anything. There's no national security threat that TikTok poses. This is more politicians, expressing their dislike of TikTok and wanting to do something about it, and playing to their electorate, whether it's on the left or whether it's on the right. It plays to their electorate to go after TikTok. It's basically a witch hunt, there's no national security issue here, particularly not when the Chinese are hacking into our very basic infrastructure. You would think that Congress would be much more interested in allocating funds for cybersecurity, for reinforcing our defenses against cyber attacks from the Chinese and the Russians, and maybe more tools for offensive strikes against the Chinese and Russians, kind of mutually assured destruction to make them think twice, three times, four times, five times before hacking into our systems. No, the real national security threat, we are told by our I was going to say idiot, but really pathetic politicians, the real national security threat is TikTok. It just shows more than anything how unserious our politicians are, right? They are completely unserious with regard to this kind of stuff. You know, shutting down TikTok is a violation of so many principles of freedom, particularly, you know, the economic freedom, and shutting down a business because you don't like the ownership of it. This is a massive precedent. Whether this is really an issue of free speech, you know, I think TikTok will make that argument. I'm not sure that is the issue, but it is, you know, because it's not clear that the bill shuts down TikTok because of what is being said on TikTok. The bill is shutting down TikTok because supposedly TikTok poses a national security threat to America because of its ownership by China and the access Chinese have to the data, our own user data. Whether that's a free speech issue is dubious. I don't know, but it certainly is a freedom of contract. We'll get to freedom of contract in a minute. Freedom of association, freedom of business, economic freedom issue, but I'm not sure we have the protections against that. I'm not sure we have the constitutional grounds to protect against that. It's going to be interesting because you know, we've got that going on, but you've also got the fact that the Biden administration is trying to do everything that it can, and I think it has Republican support on this, to try to stop the Japanese company Nippon from buying U.S. steel. Is that what freedom of what is that? You know, under what? It's just that the U.S. government is going to have to prove that there's some justification for not allowing Nippon Steel to buy a U.S. steel, and courts might reject that justification. But yes, what we have today is greater and greater and greater state involvement in the economy. And one of the disguises, one of the excuses for that state involvement in the economy, both in the Nippon buying U.S. steel and in the TikTok case, is national security. You know, we need steel companies to be owned by Americans. We need our social media to be owned by Americans. We can't have social media owned by foreigners. That somehow threatens the national security. I mean, it's a pathetic joke. It's a pathetic, sad joke. Anyway, the bill is out. The lawsuits are being filed. I'll keep track of it, let you know what happens. Nothing is going to happen very quickly. 170 million American users of TikTok are not going to be happy if it actually gets banned. I'm not sure anybody wants to buy it at the end of the day, even though Steve Mnuchin has said he wants to buy it, because TikTok loses money. It's not a profitable venture. Maybe somebody will try. I don't think for antitrust reasons another social media company can buy it. So it's not clear who would buy it. It's more likely, there is a certain likelihood that it would just be sold. It would just be closed down, and they won't be able to find a buyer for it. And BitDance has said that they're not interested in selling it. So again, they would rather close it than sell it, which seems kind of dumb, particularly if it's lost the money over the last few years. All right. Talk about contract law, or the non-existent, certainly under the Biden administration, of any semblance of a respect for contracts. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, this is Lena Khan's institution. This is what she rules over. She is one of the worst, most fascist, most interventionist FTC chairman in the history of this horrible regulatory agency. Anyway, the FTC yesterday said that employers could no longer require employees, as a condition for work, to sign non-compete agreements. Non-compete agreements. Non-compete agreements basically say that if you're fired or if you leave, you cannot go work for a competitor. You cannot work, sometimes it's even broader than that, you cannot work in the industry for a certain specified period of time. It can't be forever, but a year, 2 years, and so on. So really what this protects the employer, it protects the employer from its trade secrets being deployed by, being taken from it, being used by an employee in to bolster its competitors. And this is used extensively. It's used extensively in the finance business, in hedge funds. Every single contract in the hedge fund world has an non-compete. In my hedge fund, everybody has an non-compete. Everybody who works at the hedge fund. It's at least everybody with access to trade secrets, right? Everybody has access to the strategy. Everybody in tech signs a non-compete. That's been true from the beginning of tech. I think biotech would be the same. Any industry where you're in a position to know something that's unique to this company and that a competitor would love to have, there's a non-compete in there. 30 million jobs, 30 million workers, including, for example, TV news producers, corporate executives, computer engineers, again, everybody in finance, supposedly hairdressers, I'm not convinced about the hairdresser ones, have non-competes. The FTC said these are not fair. Why? Because employees, should be able to leave an employer and go and seek employment anywhere. Who is anybody to restrict their, quote, freedom to go and seek employment with anybody? So in the name of this, since the employee-employer relationship, contract law has long been marginalized. It's long been kicked to the side. It's long been trivialized, going back probably 100 years. I mean, Lochner is a famous Supreme Court decision in 1890-something, is the last meaningful, major decision protecting contract law, particularly contract law in employment. But suddenly since the 1930s, suddenly since the FDR Supreme Court, contract law between employer and employees is deemed completely fair game for regulations. And that's why we have all the regulations of employment law at the state level and at the federal level. And this is just one more aspect of that. Of course, this is going to be challenged in court. This is going to go, again, the business community is going to sue. So it's going to be interesting to see, again, if this reaches the Supreme Court, on what basis do they rule this unconstitutional? If they rule this unconstitutional, what about all the other dozens of regulations that restrict conditions, restrict basically contracts? What if I have a contract with my employees that they work 50-hour weeks or 60-hour weeks? That's illegal. You can't do that. And again, this relates to Lochner, where the state tried to impose a particular length of a work week, and even though there were contracts between employees and employers that had longer work weeks, did the state have a right to regulate the length of a work week in spite of employment contracts between employees and employers? And the Supreme Court ruled, no, contracts are primary. The state has no business intervening in voluntary decisions between employers and employees. That's pretty much the last time that happened. Now, I'm sure there'll be a legal scholar here that tells me there were others, but certainly since the 1930s, that whole doctrine is out. It's finished. Again, the idea is, and the FTC is saying, this massive change, and it is a big change, again, affecting over 30 million people. Remember, these are not, this is what's interesting about this. These are not low-skilled laborers. These are not people who don't have maybe the confidence or the wherewithal to negotiate their terms. These are primarily professionals. Almost all non-competes are in contracts with professionals. The FTC here is basically saying to professionals, You guys are not smart enough. You're not able enough. You don't know what's good for you. We, the philosopher kings, will dictate to you and to your employer what kind of contracts you can have. Now, they claim that this action is going to raise wages, create jobs, and increase competition between businesses. It might increase competition between businesses because trade secrets are going to leak, to put it mildly. I don't see how it raises wages. Indeed, I see companies becoming more guarded about the responsibilities they give many of their workers so that they create more silos, they create more barriers to knowledge, they create more, in a sense, lower paying jobs, they make them lower paying. I don't think this creates jobs. It might have the opposite. It might make businesses a lot less efficient, less productive, less trusting of their people. What do you do in a business where your employees can just walk away and walk to the competitor with everything and you have no contractual way of getting to them? I don't know. So this is going to have incredibly negative consequences throughout places like Silicon Valley, finance, throughout the most productive sectors of our economy. Now, and I know this is the kind of issue that does not get people riled up. This is not a cultural war battle. This is not about, I don't know, this is not about gender. This is not about sexuality. This is not about religion. So people don't get excited about this. But it's little things like this that slowly, systematically destroy our economy, its flexibility, its ability to withstand stress. The very fact that our economy's done so well over the last, relatively speaking, over the last few years in spite of expectations. These are the kind of things that chip away at that, make it less likely, particularly given the very fact that this is hitting the most important businesses in the U.S., the ones where we have clearly and unequivocally a comparative advantage, a significant, economic comparative advantage, and we're crippling ourselves. All right, a Biden administration is on a roll. So not only non-competes are out, but on Friday, the Biden administration rolled back some of the changes that the Trump administration made to the Title IX enforcement. So if you remember going back to the mid-20-teens and the first even year or two of the Biden administration, the Trump administration, there were a lot of these cases on campuses where men were being accused of sexual harassment, even rape. Pretty harsh accusations. They were being, there were kangaroo courts, basically. They were a single administrator would act as detective, prosecutor, judge, jury, and all of these were done under so-called Title IX, which is the anti-discriminating a framework by which universities get government aid in exchange for signing into this non-discriminatory policy, right? Title IX. Anyway, there were these horrific cases Now, of course, the answer to all of this is to do away with Title IX, to return universities to being private institutions, to do away with government aid, with student aid, with government money, to stop the nationalization of our university system. At least state universities, okay, they're somewhat national, but they're at the state level. But basically what we've done over the last 50 years, really since the GI Bill, but much more so since we started giving scholarships and fellowships and guaranteeing student aid, and then with Obama, it's forgotten that Obama was the one who basically nationalized and federalized student aid. He made student aid, all 100% of student aid is provided directly by the government. No more banks are involved. That has basically put every university in the country that gets student aid under Title IX, under federal regulations, so-called equality. So the solution to all this, which maybe one day some Republicans will have the guts, to actually propose rather than tinkering at the edges, is to do away with Title IX, do away with federal support of student aid, maybe go back to some kind of backing up loans that the banks give for poor students or something like that if you have to do something. But make that government footprint in terms of universities as small as possible, and get away from all of these anti-discrimination laws, including affirmative action and certain provisions of the Civil Rights Act, but certainly affirmative action. Getting rid of all of that, right? That's what a Republican administration should actually be seeking. By the way, you could get rid of affirmative action with an executive order. It's not a law. Affirmative action was passed as an executive order. Therefore, you can get rid of it as an executive order. Bush could have done it. Reagan could have done it. Bush Jr. could have done it. Trump, the radical, drain the swamp, could have done it. None of them did it. None of them did it. Right? None of them did. They don't even have to have a Senate and a House, which many of them had. They just need to sign an executive order getting rid of affirmative action. They don't have the balls to do it. All they do is talk about, going after the left. But when it comes to actually doing something that would actually make a difference, that would actually change the culture, that would actually force the universities and the rest of the country to adapt, adjust, they don't have the guts to do it. Anyway, Trump, to his credit, at least he didn't roll back Title IX, which he should have. At least, passed certain rules that allowed, particularly men at the universities, to have due process when they were accused under Title IX of harassment, discrimination, and so on. So you had a right to access the evidence that was presented against you. You had a right to have a live hearing to adjudicate the claim. You have a right to have, in a sense, an advisor or some kind of your own attorney to represent you and cross-examine witnesses. All of that, the Biden administration on Friday did away with. It just did away with it. And think about what message that is saying, right? We don't believe in objectivity. We don't believe in due process. We don't believe in innocence until proven guilty. This is a kind of a reactionary impact to going back to the Me Too kind of women are always to be believed, which America is moving away from. People don't take that seriously anymore. And yet here is Biden kind of harking back to the Obama years when this was the big deal, and doing away completely with due process for these kids, with any kind of legitimate. Now, look, universities should be able to set, if they're private, should be able to set whatever they want. They can kick out students for whatever they want to kick out students. The government shouldn't be intervening. This is why Title IX should be rejected out of hand completely, all of it. But if the government is involved, then the government is responsible for at least going through some kind of process that has the semblance of justice. And it's a disgrace that they don't and won't and refuse to do so. Now, this is clearly, unequivocally Biden, again, catering and trying to manipulate his far-left audience to try to get them to come out and vote for him. These are the little things that I don't know that Biden believes in. I don't think he cares about. I don't think it matters to him one iota. But these are the kind of cultural war things that get his base all excited. And given that he's doing very badly with young people right now, with his base, and he's worried that they won't come out and vote for him in November, not that they'd vote for Trump, but they might stay home, he's going to give them everything. He's going to sell this country out. And of every far-left agenda item that they can think of, they're going to throw in there, again, whether the Democrats and Biden believe in it or don't believe in it, they're gonna embrace it. They're going to throw it in there as part of basically the campaign. This is all about the campaign. Why it's taken him 4 years to do this, and this is going to make the campuses a disaster again. It's going to bring in headlines again about everything that's going, the discrimination and the sexual harassment, all the stuff that's been kind of quiet in the last few years is now going to have headlines again, because again, this will embolden the worst people out there to come up with accusations and to play into kind of the far left nuttiness around these kind of issues. The hatred of men, the hatred of sex. It's going to make life on campuses even more hellish than it already is, and it is for a variety of different reasons. All right, we'll get back to campuses in a bit when we talk about Columbia. I know Dave Goodman has a super chat here. He's at Columbia, across the street from Columbia, so we'll read that as well when we get to it. I mean, the consequence, we've talked about this, but new cases keep coming up that are just horrific. The consequence of doing away with Roe versus Wade, and with states passing these really anti-life, anti-abortion laws that are clearly and unequivocally laws that are aimed at penalizing women, at destroying women's lives, at putting the lives of women at real risk. And they're aimed at that. It's not a byproduct. It's not an unintended consequences. This is, at the end of the day, what it's all about. Women don't matter. This is the conservative agenda. They don't care about women. They want them to be home. They want to have kids. And a part of having kids is putting them at risk for all kinds of complications and all kinds of issues. Then so be it. That's part of being a woman. It toughens them up. Suck it up. Live with it, women. Shania Smith Cunningham arrived at Memorial Regional Hospital on December 21st, 2022. This is 5 days after her water broke, but she was only halfway through her pregnancy. She came to the hospital pleading to be treated. And basically, treatment at this point is an abortion. There is no way a fetus is going to live when the water's broken inside the womb, not treating her, clearly risked her life, her health. And yet the hospital in Hollywood, Florida, this is the home of DeSantis, turned her away because of the abortion restrictions. It was, in spite of the fact that they knew and they acknowledged that sending her home put her life in peril, they did not want to risk going through a procedure that could get them in trouble with the law. Now, that's just horror. And this is exactly what these abortion restrictions cause, and these laws that are not objective, that are just arbitrary government power and government destruction of female life. Now, there is a law, I guess. There is a law in the United States. Now, there shouldn't be this law, but there is a law in the United States. It basically says that hospitals cannot turn away emergency care. They have to provide emergency care. When life is in danger, care must be given. They can't deny it out of considerations, for example, whether you have insurance or not. Now, this is a bad law, but it is the law in the books. It does apply. And the Biden administration applied this law and demanding that the hospital basically treat her. So this is a lawsuit where the administration is suing the hospital because it didn't treat her. It is penalizing. It's trying to penalize the hospital for failing to provide an abortion in an emergency situation. This case is another case coming from the overturn of Roe versus Wade, all a consequence of Hobbes, and a consequence of the non-objective nature of the laws that all these states are passing. This case is called Moyle versus United States. It centers on Emergency Treatment and Labor Act, a federal law that requires hospitals that receive federal funds to stabilize or transfer patients needing emergency care. Hospitals must provide the care regardless of the patient's insurance status, mental illness, or other complications that might otherwise lead hospitals to turn them away. Federal officials have said that the national law takes precedence over state abortion restrictions, and they've sued. So this is the case. It's going, I think it was argued today, maybe, in front of the Supreme Court. So we will see what the Supreme Court rules. But this is the kind of insanity. This is the kind of craziness that once you ban abortion, once you take away the right of a woman to decide what happens with her body, to decide on the kind of medical procedure she chooses to have or not to have. Once you take that right away from a woman, these are the kind of cases you are going to have. And, all kind of medical complications, and some of them threaten the woman's life, some of them don't when she arrives at the emergency room. Delaying care, though, could threaten her health, even if it doesn't threaten her life. Under what circumstances should the state intervene? Under what circumstances can the hospital do a procedure that then violates abortion law? What happens? What has precedent? Which one of these laws actually has precedent? All of this is a consequence of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. A lot of women are going to pay with their lives and with the life and with the quality of their life over the next few years for the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And again, those of us who believe in individual rights, those of us who believe in human flourishing and human success, it seems like, nobody really cares except people on the left. This is an issue that's being left to the left to care about, and those of us who supposedly care about freedom seem to be very quiet about this. Oh, why? Because it plays into the hand of our enemy, the left. It plays into, it doesn't support our so-called big tent friends on the right. So we abandon women in the name of the bigger fish to fry. We've got to defeat the left, even if we have to give up the right to abortion. All right, a few more stories. Last week, I think it was last week, maybe it was Monday, we talked about the story about Google finally coming around and actually firing the people who occupied the offices of one of the senior executives at Google, and actually the CEO of Google in something quite striking, issuing a memo to staff at Google, basically saying, we are driven by a mission, by Google's mission. This is not a debate society. This is not a place to protest. This is a place to do work. You can hold whatever positions you want. Don't bring them to work. Keep them at home. This is striking because, of course, Google has been a place with the opposite. So has much of Silicon Valley, where politics, political opinion, controversial views have played a huge role in corporate life within these companies. This was particularly true starting, really, I think it came to the public awareness in a big way during BLM, but it was already evident even before BLM, even before COVID. But certainly, how to the extent to which Silicon Valley companies were becoming woke companies. They were acting as woke companies, speaking as woke companies, and this was happening primarily at the influence of the employees. So it was bottom up. CEOs, for the most part, clearly didn't like it, clearly didn't support it, but weren't willing to challenge it either. They just went along. They refused to stand up and challenge the craziness of and the dominance of the left on these issues at the workplace. And this happened, of course, to all the, a bunch of Silicon Valley companies across a variety of different kind of tech verticals. All this came to a head in 2020, and I think it was late 2020. By the way, even during this period, in private conversations, tech executives would say, this stuff is terrible. We don't agree that this is important. We don't agree with our employees. If it was up to us, we wouldn't make a big deal out of all these issues. Business is to make a profit. It's to produce. It's to create. It's not to facilitate, to immerse itself in political debates and discussions. That was, I'd say, 90% of CEOs in Silicon Valley. That's what they actually thought. But like in most cases of cancel culture, they were too afraid. They basically gave in to the radicals in the HR departments, to the DEI appointees, to their workforce that demanded the corporation be political. And this got worse and worse, starting with BLM, and we've seen it. Well, not starting with BLM. BLM was maybe the peak, but it kept. It's been. You remember the guy who was fired from Google because he said something about women might not be as good at programming as men, right? And he wrote that memo, and he got fired, and that created this complete storm and craziness and insanity. And again, executives having to apologize and executives having to make their political views known. I mean, this was going on even before BLM. BLM made it peak. And then a brave CEO stood up against it. Brian Armstrong, I don't know if you remember this, but Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, basically issued a memo in 2020 saying, you know, in our business, we're about business. We're about doing business. We're about, you know, here's our mission statement. Here's what we do. You know, if you come to work for Coinbase, this is what we expect for you. You can have any opinion you want. We will not hire or fire you based on your opinion. But keep it off the corporate chat. Keep it out of the corporate dining room. Keep it out of the workspace. In your own time, you can be an activist. You can advocate for whatever you want. The world went apoplectic. Wired, Fast Company, Axios, The Verge, everybody just went after him. They tried to dig up dirt. Now, one of the things he said, if you might remember this, we covered this in the Yaron Brook show at the time in 2020. He said, look, if you want to leave because you don't agree with this policy, that's cool. I will pay you out. I pay you severance, no problem. You can leave. I think 30% of his employees left. And that was the way he got rid of kind of the wacky activist leftists who wanted to turn the corporate place into a woke, you know, debate society. Or not debate society, cancel society. He paid them out, they left, they complained. There was story after story after story about this. But you know what? Brian Armstrong survived. His board supported him. The company has done well. He has managed to hire employees to replace the ones who left. Indeed, I think it became an attraction. Oh God, I'd love to work for Coinbase. We don't have to deal with this crap that I have to watch what I say and you know, who knows, they'll come after me and you know, everybody wants to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about politics. I want to work. Indeed, he lost the worst employees. He gained new employees, and he did very, very well. When he stood up and fought for this, you know, maybe a couple of people like Paul Graham and a guy named Balaji, maybe a couple of people in the Valley stood up and supported him. But basically, there was silence from other CEOs. They were cowards. They were cowards. But 6 months later, a guy at, I don't even know what this is, but a Rails creator and Basecamp founder. His name is David Heinemeier Hansen, Scandinavian. Basically reoriented his company again with a mission focus and paid those employees who would not accept that to leave. Here, I'll pay you, just go away. Again, you know, he says, we spent 2 weeks in hell. I probably received 2,000 emails at the time, some 30,000 tweets. We trended on Twitter for, I think, 24 hours, right around the time all these articles came out attacking. And yet, they survived. Survived. In 2022, basically, Facebook did the same thing. It kind of went underreported, but basically Zuckerberg made the decision that Meta was going to dump politics. Now, I don't know how well that has been practiced, but Meta again declared that it was now mission-focused. Politics out. Elon Musk, of course, taking over Twitter, changed the dynamics of Twitter, changed the dynamics of inside Twitter, away from that. And now, I think in what may be the final straw and the complete capitulation, Google has come around to mission first. No more politics. Now, this is fantastic. This is, you know, I remember I said, I thought we were at peak woke at some point. Yeah, I mean, even Silicon Valley has now systematically, over the last 4 years, rebelled against woke, thrown woke to the curve. Even Google, one of the most politically correct woke companies in the world, is now doesn't want to have anything to do with politicizing its workspace. And I think the Gemini AI was a wake-up call for them. And it was such a disaster. And it hit the stock so bad. And it hit, I think, the pride of managers and the better people at Google who were embarrassed by it, legitimately embarrassed by it. I think you're going to see real changes at Google. And I think if you see real changes at Google, you're going to see real changes everywhere else. I think that firing 28 people at Google is the beginning of something bigger. Now, they're going to have to fire a lot more people than those 28 to get Google away from the wokeness and this political correctness. But my guess is that the next version of Gemini AI is not going to be as woke as the one we just saw. My guess is that while everything will still be tilted left, because the people who work there are tilted left, the crazy left, the explicitly woke agenda item that Silicon Valley was really pushing aggressively, I don't know, since 2018 or maybe since 2016, hard to exactly tell, I don't remember exactly when, that is dying out. It is dying out slowly. It won't happen all at once, and it's not done yet. But you got to take the good news when there is good news. And this is, I think, a piece of really good news. The Google CEO memo from last week. By the way, if you want the history of this and how it's evolved, I would, again, refer you to Pirate Wires. My source for a lot of this, a lot of news on Silicon Valley comes from Pirate Wires. Mike Solana, who is, I thought he used to work for Peter Thiel. I think now he just runs Pirate Wires. Maybe he still works for Peter Thiel. I don't know. Maybe this is a Peter Thiel company. Probably is. But Pirate Wires, which is trying to set up itself up to be kind of a right-of-center tech publication, is very good. I don't agree with it. For example, Mike Solana is huge on banning TikTok and closing TikTok down. So I obviously don't agree with everything they stand for, but they do good stuff. This article is called Mission Accomplished. Google concludes, they promise, a decade of unhinged activism. Brian Armstrong's advice to mission first, and it's the end of tech's silent winter. You also saw a bunch of people coming out, when was it, last week in Silicon Valley, big shots like Mark Andreessen, coming out and saying, we're sorry we didn't speak up earlier. We're sorry we didn't stand by people who were canceled. We're sorry that we let cancellations happen in Silicon Valley and stayed silent about it. That, you couldn't even imagine that happening just a few months ago, never mind a few years ago. So real changes, this is good stuff, real changes happening at the heart of woke central. All right, here's a topic I hate talking about, but God, this is a news roundup, so I guess we have to talk about. it. But this is Trump's trial. So yesterday, I guess, was the first day of, or Monday was the first day of Trump's trial for the hush money that he gave the porn star and the Playboy model during 2015 in order to keep them silent, so they wouldn't talk during the campaign, because so it wouldn't hurt his election renewal. And here's the thing about this case. I said when Alvin Bragg, who I've talked about since he got elected, is a horrible, far left, soft on crime district attorney, Manhattan district attorney. I said this when it was first brought. This is just a stupid case. It's not stupid in the sense that Trump didn't do all these things. He did. And he falsified business records in order to not show it as hush money, basically. He provided hush money. He basically paid them off so that they wouldn't speak. All of that is just fact. That's just reality. And I don't think there's any question that that is true. But that is at most a misdemeanor. There's no crime here. And what came across in the opening statements of the Manhattan District Attorney on Monday is he still hasn't defined what the crime actually is. Why is this a crime? Now, it might be a federal crime in terms of federal campaign law, using campaign funds to pay somebody off to silence them, might be a federal crime. But this is not in a federal court. This is in a state court. Why does state court have anything to do with a federal election? It has nothing to do with it. The whole thing is, and it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do the side that believes that Trump shouldn't be president, shouldn't run for president. It doesn't do that side any good to have what is clearly frivolous and stupid. I mean, it's likely that Trump will be acquitted. That'll help him enormously in the campaign. It's possible that he'll be found guilty, but then very likely that it'll be reversed on appeal. That'll play into Trump's victimhood complex and his whole victimhood rhetoric, which surprisingly, I guess, not really, but should be surprising, plays really, really, really well with Republicans. They love victims, just like the Democrats. No difference anymore. They love the victimhood argument. So he's accused of falsifying records, a misdemeanor, and he's probably guilty of that. Pretty sure he's guilty of that. But there's no crime. There's no actual felony. And to create a felony, the district attorney is just being absolutely unequivocally convoluted. And again, this plays right into the MAGA argument that all of Trump's legal problems are just the left is out to get him. Because in this one, it is the left is just out to get him. It just plays into that everything is, whereas some of the others are legit. This one is not. So it's really stupid. It's really bad, and I think this is going to blow up in the Democrats' face. Really blow up in their face. All right, two quick stories about technology, and then we'll, I don't know, we've got a lot of super chats, a lot of very high dollar super chats. So I might do Colombia first, and then get all of that done, and then do all the super chats at once. I might do that today, given that some of the super chats are already related to Colombia. So let me talk about Colombia and then get back to the super chats. All right. All right. Couple of quick technology stories. I promise good news. I try to have the only area where I find really good news. The Google story was a good news story, but really good news is on the technology front. Okay, so there is now a new technology that will actually allow for the recycling of plastics. Now, plastics are well known to be a product that cannot be recycled. It is what fills much of our landfills. It supposedly is what's destroying our oceans. We have microplastics everywhere. Everybody complains about it. Everybody's bitching and complaining. And the idea here is that you'll be able to recycle plastic into plastic. And this is supposed to be phenomenal because you'll take plastic and turn it into plastic. And over time, this is also kind of, quote, good, not really, but good, because we'll be using less fossil fuels to create new plastics, because we'll just be able to constantly recycle and create this closed loop of recycling plastics into plastics and never have to create new plastics. So this is like an environmentalist wet dream, you'd think. And you'd think the environmentalists would massively embrace this idea of advanced recycling, which would convert plastic into plastic. I'm going to make a prediction. And my prediction is that the environmentalists will find massive fault in this technology. I don't know what it'll be, but they will hate it. They will argue against it. They will want to ban it. Because they don't want you to use plastic. They don't want you to live comfortably and well. They don't want you to have the kind of life that plastics make possible. They want to ban plastics for the sake of banning plastics, not for the sake of some clean environment. What they really care about is you suffering, is you taking a step backwards. So while science is going to giving us these major breakthroughs that can actually, as we expect, will clean the environment. Capitalism is the mechanism by which we clean the environment. Because as companies become more efficient, that means they have less waste, which means less pollution. Waste is wasteful. If I cannot have waste, I can be more efficient, which is what capitalism constantly drives towards. If we can find a way to cheaply recycle plastic into plastic, wow, given how much plastic we use, that could be great, an efficiency contribution, a cost-lowering contribution. And we can use fossil fuels for higher-end uses, for greater value-added uses. That's what capitalism does. It actually cleans the environment. Might talk about that in my capitalism course next week. All right, finally, this is just an amazing story just in terms of the numbers. Amazon has already, you remember I talked about the humanoid robots that Boston Dynamics is putting out there, and I said, ooh, now Amazon is going to buy those and replace all its staff in the warehouses with humanoid robots. Well, they're not waiting for humanoid robots. Amazon has already installed more than 750,000 robots in its warehouses at an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a massive, obviously, efficiency increase. It's incredibly, it lowers costs, and it, again, relieves our economy from very, what would you call them, muscle-driven jobs. Jobs that are physically wearing. Generally, our economy is moving towards, and has been moving over the last 250 years, and will move more so in the next few decades, towards fewer and fewer jobs that require muscle, and more jobs that require mind. Now, there's a lot in between, in a sense that the U.S. economy has become a service economy. It has been for a long time. Now, some of those service jobs don't require you to be super smart, or, waiters at restaurants, all kinds of jobs that still require a certain mentality, but not physical strength. And of course, a lot of them will require smart. But we can even outsource the smartness, if you will, right? We can outsource the smartness to the AI. And you can have somebody who's not that smart querying the AI. Then what does the AI do? It makes the person making the queries much smarter, in a sense of having access to information and knowledge that most people just don't have. So robot revolution is here. It is going to dominate. It is going to kill, destroy a lot of jobs. It will create many more jobs than it destroys, as every technological revolution has done. When I see 750,000 robots, I go, amazing. I'm so excited about the future. But the subheading of this is Amazon says it will create new jobs to replace roles taken over by machines, but it isn't clear whether this will happen quickly enough. So job losses are coming to Amazon at the warehouse level, but other jobs will be created. And as Amazon becomes more efficient, new jobs across the economy will be created. All right. As usual, it is technology where the source of good news resides. All right, so let's move now to the big story that has been kind of on everybody's radar, has been discussed everywhere, made the headlines this weekend, and actually, shockingly, in many newspapers, didn't make the headlines, but that tells you something as well about what is going on. And that is the student demonstrations at Columbia, but really, the student demonstrations all across the country, because it's not just in Columbia. And certainly, once last week, police went into Columbia and arrested 100 people and tried to dismantle the tent city built on the Columbia property. That generated hundreds of students coming out and increasing the demonstration in Columbia. But it also resulted in demonstrations in universities all over the United States, from NYU to Yale, to some University of California, to some schools in California, across the country. Students are going out and demonstrating, shutting down programs. At Columbia, by the way, the school has announced that classes are moving to virtual because they cannot physically hold classes in classrooms with physically present students because it's too dangerous, too risky. And therefore, Columbia would rather cancel classes, put everybody on Zoom, than actually go in and clear the disruptors out. So I want to talk about that. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot to talk about who these students, what these students represent, what they are, what meaning this all has. There's a lot to talk about supposed free speech issues here. Free speech issues of whom? One, I think, would like to ask. Just a lot to talk about the attitude and state of universities and God, and you could argue right now, that as our corporate world is getting marginally better, certainly Silicon Valley is getting marginally better, the state of our universities is getting dramatically worse. And what is going on in campuses right now just cannot be compared to anything else that's really happened in terms of scale and ugliness. Now, if you think about it, the student protests in the 60s demanding bringing troops home from Vietnam, they had an argument. They had a really good case. I mean, we would have also agreed that the troops should be brought home from Vietnam. Indeed, some of those demonstrations were about ending the draft and burning draft cards. I mean, we also supported ending the draft. Now, it's true that philosophically, these protests, the protests in the 60s, were from a perspective of anti-Americanism, of American hatred. But what they were actually arguing for was reasonable, particularly from an age group that feared that they would be sacrificed in the jungles of Vietnam for nothing. So understandable. even BLM, particularly in the very early days after George Floyd's killing, you could say, okay, this country has a long history of racism. That racism is real. That racism is not being eliminated completely. We can argue about what extent racism is still an issue in America, but I don't think anybody real would claim that there's no racism in America. So even BLM had some semblance of an argument, at least early on, before they started burning their own neighborhoods down and started looting stores. But what are these protests about? What is the nature of the Columbia protest? What is the nature of the pro-Hamas protests at American universities and in the American streets? The very nature of these protests is a hatred. A hatred of the good, a hatred of success, a hatred of the West, and a hatred of civilization, a hatred of America. These demonstrations are pro-Hamas. They're not anti-Israel. They're not just anti-Israel. They're pro-Hamas. These demonstrations are pro-war. If you're pro-Hamas, you're pro-war. They're not pacifists. They're not anti-war. They want blood to flow. They just want that blood to be Israeli blood, Jewish blood. And they want the inflictors of the harm to be the barbarians of Hamas. What we have here is an expression in our universities, among our students, vast numbers of them, of the worst, most horrible kind of nihilism one could imagine. They want to see blood. They want to see destruction. They want to see Israel destroyed. But Israel is only a proxy in their minds. Israel is not the end. Israel is only a proxy in their minds for the West, for Western civilization. It supposedly represents white people, Europeans, even though that's far from the truth, just in terms of skin color in Israel. But that's what it represents in their minds. That is, what's next after Israel, if they're ever successful? Europe, America, any country that has embraced Western principles is finished, or they would like it to be finished. Now, there is a lot of discussion out there about freedom to demonstrate, and about free speech, and about all these issues. But there's only one really fundamental, major question that everybody should be asking. And this is true of everybody who is worried about what's going on at the universities. And you don't hear this much. The real question should be, how did our universities produce this? How are these people coming out of our universities with this kind of level of hatred of the system that made their education possible? This isn't about Israel and Hamas. That's not the question to be asked. The fundamental question to be asked is, how is this barbaric nihilism a product of our universities? Almost every one of our universities. But the worst thing about this is a product of our best universities, of our elite universities, of the Ivy League. This is not something that happened yesterday. This is not a phenomena that just occurred. This is a product of 40, 50, 60 years since the 60s, really, of what has been taught at these universities. This is a product of the new left, of its nihilism in the 60s being buried and hidden in textbooks, buried and hidden in all kinds of academic-sounding names, from postmodernism to intersectionality theory, to post-colonialism studies, to gender studies. All of these, and I'm missing, another dozen or two, academic jargon for an ever-increasing hatred and nihilism and eagerness to destroy the good because it is good. Because, look, there's no question. Why do they hate Israel? I mean, if they cared about Arab lives, if Arab lives mattered, to use the quotation, right? If Arab lives mattered, then why were there no demonstrations when the Syrians, in a civil war, were brutally slaughtering their own population? Tens of thousands died. You remember that big exodus out of Syria to Europe. Why were there no protests about the civil war in Syria and demanding that Assad stop, ceasefire now? And by the way, demanding that Putin stop, because Putin was supporting the Syrian government in slaughtering its own people. If Muslim lives matter, why is there no outrage about the civil war that's going on in Sudan right now, where Muslims are killing Muslims by the thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands? Nobody cares. Nobody cares. What about Yemen? I mean, these kids are shouting their support for the Houthis. They're shouting their support for an Islamist regime that has been fighting a civil war within Yemen that has been brutal, where civilians have died by the tens of thousands. Where were these students when the Houthis were killing civilians? Right? There was none, because they don't care. These pro-Hamas students don't care about Hamas. They don't care about Muslims. They don't care about Arabs. They don't care about the Palestinians. They say justice to Palestine. Very few of them can point to Palestine in a map. Very few of them know anything about the history of Palestine. And they don't care. They simply do not care. What do they care about? They're driven by hate. They're driven by hate of success. They're driven by hate of progress. They're driven by hate of civilization. Columbia University, I think, is symbolic that it's the focal point right now, because Columbia University, one of the major intellectuals who got us to where we are today, was Edward Said, who received a BA from Princeton, an MA from Harvard, and joined the faculty at Columbia University as a lecturer in English in 1963. In 1967, promoted to assistant professor of English and comparative literature, and became one of the biggest promoters of this neo-post-colonialism, whatever it's called, agenda. He called it differently. His terminology was Orientalism. It was this approach of the evil West and the way it looks at the Arab world. celebrated academic, hugely influential, hugely successful. I talked about him in some of my talks post 9/11. His origins, he was a Palestinian in his origins. He was born in 1935. He died in 2003. And a real political activist, and his Orientalism is one of the classic ideas that ultimately led us to identitarianism dominating the academic front, the academic world in which these students live. So, him being a Columbia professor, and the department in which he worked in, I think he started the Middle East Studies department, if I remember right, at Columbia University. That department has been one of the most anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-West departments in the United States. Who do you think funds these departments, by the way? Most Middle East studies departments in the United States are funded by the Qataris, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis. In other words, people with an agenda that's fundamentally anti-Western, an agenda that wants to make the West feel guilty for its so-called sins. And Israel is then just viewed as one piece of that sin. It's just a colony. So, Edward Said at Columbia was a driving force. Of course, if you know John Rawls's philosophy, but it's much more than that. It's the legal theory of intersectionality. It's all these legal theories. All these theories. None of them, I think, interestingly enough, none of them originating in philosophy. All of them using philosophy. All of them inspired by postmodernism. All of them inspired by postmodernist philosophy. All of them basically feeding into this identitarian view that what matters is your skin color. What matters is your ethnic background. What matters is how oppressed you are relative to everybody else. And of course, that is just Christianity, Christian altruism applied secularly and consistently. Who is the most oppressed? In other words, how do we know who suffers the most? It's simple. We look at outcomes. We don't look at process. Process is deceiving. We look at outcomes. If you're suffering, you must be oppressed. If you're happy, successful, wealthy, doing well in life, you must be an oppressor. And everything in this wacky left, everything is viewed through this one prism. And this is the prism of these students. And the real question that everybody should be asking themselves is not what do we do about this demonstration or that demonstration, this sit-in, that student. What do we do about an educational system? What do we do about our universities if this is what they have produced? What do we do about our educational system, our universities, our professors, if all they do is produce hatred and the adoration and elevation of murderous, raping barbarians? Because that's what it means to be pro-Hamas. It means to support rape. It means to support murder. It means to support barbarism. How have our universities produced this? And of course, when you see at Columbia, professors, and not a few, a significant number of professors, supporting the demonstrators, going out and standing with them, then that tells you everything you need to know. And then the question is, ultimately, question has to be, how do you change that? How do you change that? And people yell academic freedom. There is no such thing at the end of the day as academic freedom. There's no such thing as academic freedom. If you're poisoning the minds of your students, you should be fired. If you are teaching them gobbledygook, a poisonous philosophy, horrible ideas, how to be a hater, what's academic freedom got to do with it? You're not doing your job. You should be fired. I mean, this is the problem. Everybody wants to be pro-free speech. Well, there's no free speech on campus. Never has been, never will be, and shouldn't be. Columbia University is not a public space. It's a private university. And I think even state universities need to be thought of really as private entities. They should be treated as such. You get to set the context. So clearly at Columbia University, you do not have a right to demand, to march in a white hoodie demanding the return of slavery. You will be punished by the university for doing that. So there's no free speech in that sense. Now, you can march in Charlottesville, you can march in Charlottesville and, and declare Jews will not replace us and exhibit neo-Nazi, whatever, and blood and soil, and you can be a racist in Charlottesville in public space at a public demonstration, and nobody has a right to silence you and shut you down. But Columbia is private property. Columbia has to decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And what is acceptable for Columbia's mission? What is Columbia's mission? If Columbia's mission is to educate, if Columbia's mission is to bring enlightenment to its students, bring them ideas that are helpful to their lives, to help them flourish and to be successful in the world. Having hundreds of people standing in your courtyard praising Hamas, denouncing Jews, wanting to kill Jews, burn Tel Aviv. You should see Tel Aviv down. That doesn't serve your educational mission. Of course Columbia should shut it down. There's no free speech at Columbia to denounce, to stop classes. I mean, literally, Columbia has gone virtual because they can't run classes because these people are interrupting those classes. If that isn't harassment, if that isn't a violation of some Columbia code of conduct, then what is? Why have a code of conduct at all? Maybe they don't. But even then, if they get them out of the courtyard, they clear them out, and everybody goes back to the classrooms, what we should really be worried about, what we should really be thinking about, what we should really be scared for is what they're being taught. Is what are they being taught? What are they learning? And again, this is not Columbia, just Columbia. This is across the United States. Again, particularly in the best universities. But NYU, They were chanting death and kill and Jews and Israel and destruction. At Yale, at California, Berkeley, and many other places. There's no, was it Berkeley in Chemerinsky's house, the activist who disrupted a dinner and wouldn't leave the house. There's no free speech right in somebody's private home. It just isn't. So, the challenge is, what do you do about this? And the only thing we can do about it is have an alternative. Present an alternative. And whether it's an educational alternative, a political alternative, a real alternative. And there is no. There is none. To the left's identitarian politics, the alternative is Tucker's identitarian politics. To the left's professors teaching all this garbage, what alternative is there out there? Nothing. National conservatism. Or now, Christian nationalism, even better. To one group of vile haters, we have another group of vile haters. Less intellectual, but still vile haters. One collectivists, we should replace them with these other collectivists. They're our collectivists. It's okay, don't worry. Can't be the solution. Now, I think most Americans are horrified by what's going on. Most Americans do not agree with what is happening. I know many parents who are now thinking twice about sending their kids to Columbia or Harvard or even MIT, and they should. The alternative model of higher education, at least in terms of attitude here, is Chicago, where this kind of stuff is not tolerated. Where you can be vocal about your opinions, but you cannot disrupt. You cannot intimidate. You cannot harass. And the institution doesn't really have an opinion, although it would be nice if the institution took the opinion of being pro-Western civilization. Isn't that what they're supposed to be teaching? It's time to get rid of the Ivies. Not by government fiat, not by government programs, but by parents shifting resources. The resources, their children, elsewhere. Taking their kids out of the Ivy Leagues. It's time that parents start looking at real alternatives, not alternatives that give you a great line on your resume, but alternatives where you actually get an education. I don't know. The Lyceum program at Clemson University. Unfortunately, it's very small. Or maybe the University of Austin at Texas. Or maybe a whole variety of new universities to come about. Or maybe no university, because it's better not to go to any university than to get this crap. I will say, it's heartening to see the number of people enrolled in the humanities declining. Not because I'm against humanities. I love the humanities. Humanities should be taught. But if they're going to be taught as badly as they're being taught today, nobody should take their classes. And those professors will ultimately be fired or retire and not be replaced. And then maybe we can start from scratch. But as long as this generation of professors are where they are, I'm happy students are not going into the humanities. And what you're seeing is a decline in humanities, a rise in sciences, a rise in engineering. Those are good things. Now, maybe they're all driven by foreigners And then what we need is more immigrants who haven't gone through our crazy humanities programming and haven't gone through our crazy high schools and primary schools where this garbage is being taught. This isn't taught elsewhere around the world, not to the extent that it's taught here. So maybe immigration is how we save American culture, American civilization. One of the things that is really horrific, partially horrific about all this, is the administrations of these universities. We saw what happened with Harvard and Penn, where the president had to resign, but it's not clear that the new president is going to be any different. The administrations of these universities will not condemn what is going on. They will not condemn the disruptions. They will not condemn the harassment. They will not condemn the ideas. And this is the key. And this is, they can't. On what grounds? Particularly if they're DEI appointees themselves. They cannot condemn the ideas. Because what they should say is that these ideas that are being expressed by these pro-Hamas groups are vile, they're horrible, they do not belong at Columbia University or at Harvard or so on. This is not an issue of free speech. This is an issue of harassment. This is an issue of what is appropriate at an educational institution. They're going to treat this kind of attitude in the same way as they would treat blatant racism, in the same way that they treat blatant, anti-homosexuality, and that they will not allow it. At the very least, you would expect them to make some kind of moral statement about, supporting Hamas is evil. But no. At best, they won't condemn it. But at worst, they morally equivocate. Hamas is truly horrible, a terrorist organization. It's not a terrorist organization. Stop calling Hamas terrorists. They're not. They're a government. They're the government of the Palestinian people in Gaza. They are a political force. They're not terrorists. I've been saying this since a long time, but certainly since October 7th. Say Hamas, what Hamas does is horrific. Israel, with all its problems, with all its deficits, is a free country. Freedom trumps authoritarianism. I think that should just be a principle in American education. Freedom trumps authoritarianism. We support freedom. We denounce authoritarianism. That's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Freedom trumps authoritarianism. But they can't even do that. Israel, a free country, is treated as if it's exactly the same morally as Gaza, Hamas, which are hating, authoritarian, dictatorial theocracy. They're the same. If these students and these administrators and these universities cared about liberty and freedom of individuals, where were they when the Iranian regime is oppressing? Where are they? Not were they. Where are they? With regard to the Iranian regime oppressing its women, not allowing them to wear what they want to wear. Any word from any of these professors? Any word from a university administrator? Any word for a pro-Arab student group? pro-Muslim student group denouncing the Iranian regime. Of course not. Of course not. Because it's not about caring about liberty, freedom, rights, not even of women, of homosexuals, of minorities, of anybody. And it's not hypocrisy. It's driven by hate. The guiding ideology is hate. The guiding ideology is hatred of the good for being the good. This is the most destructive ideology that exists. It is the kind of nihilism, the kind of that Leonard Bernstein describes in Dim. This is D2 all the way. Completely disintegrated, completely hateful, a rejection of any civilization and a adoration and embrace of barbarism and nihilism, destruction and violence for its own sake. There is zero, nothing, nada redeeming about these professors or about these students. And these administrators should be embarrassed to be working at these universities. And a new set of administrators should come in, should lay down the law, and should fire who can be fired, and start changing the curriculum, changing the professors, changing the orthodox, unquestioned ideology of these institutions, starting from the top, starting from the Ivy Leagues. And it's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen. Yesterday I met with one of the business people who withdrew 9 figures from the University of Pennsylvania because of what happened. 9 figures. Right? And he basically gave them a blueprint of how to look for a new dean, how to look for a new president, and what should change at the university. And he got no response. He took out $100 million, and he got no response from the university. And they're not going to take us seriously. They're not going to take him seriously. Robert Kraft, finally, has come out and said he's an alum of Columbia and a big donor to Columbia. He's the owner of the New England Patriots. He's come out and says he no longer is comfortable supporting Columbia University. That's so weak. The only way change will come is if hundreds, thousands of these alumni, these financial supporters, withdraw their funds and then demand substantive, real change. But for that, they have to understand that what is actually going on. They have to understand what the real problem is. They have to be willing to look critically at themselves and to look critically at their professors, to look critically at the curriculum, to look critically at what they've been teaching for 60 years. And they have to have an alternative. But how many enlightened professors, enlightened from the sense of, from the Enlightenment professors, are there at American universities today? How many people can actually replace these monsters who teach today? It's a challenge. And who's going to replace them? Where are they going to come from? Who's going to train them? Well, this is why we need new intellectuals. This is why we need completely fresh blood. This is why we need alternative educational institutions. This is why we need to disrupt the educational system as much as we can. And maybe AI will replace them. But if AI is trained on their books, on their textbooks, it doesn't help us. You need somebody to write new textbooks. You need somebody to bring sanity to the curriculum. Without the sanity brought to the curriculum, nothing changes. Nothing changes. And indeed, if sanity is not brought to the curriculum, the backlash against what's going on in the universities is going to be horrific. It's going to be the worst of all worlds. We will all regret it. Because once you legitimize barbarism, then it's a question of which barbarians win. Which barbarians win? Anyway, I had meetings yesterday with 3 billionaires, or close. All of them have withdrawn their funds from the universities. All of them reject DEI, ESG, all of this stuff. All of them are looking for alternatives. And by the way, some of the money that was taken out of University of Pennsylvania went to Austin University. Some of it went to Chicago. Now, whether Chicago lives up to the reputation, I'm not sure. But it certainly seems that it's better than some of these other places. Chicago has its own problems. Often the same, but more moderate. But, you know, people are looking for alternatives. People are fed up with what's going on right now. And the real challenge they're going to find is there's just not enough professors who think differently than the professors that have brought us the mess that we have today. And you know, the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, just hatred of civilization and anything representing civilization, which is what is driving these protests and what is driving these professors and what has driven much of the culture of right. All right. I think I'm going to skip the last topic that I had listed. I'll edit it out afterwards, which was about the peace. I'll do that separately. It's about some ideas about Saudi Arabia and what Saudi Arabia is trying to do. All right. That is the news, and that was 45 minutes or so on one major topic, which is Colombia. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in this topic, I do recommend this morning, Ben Baer and Anka Gate spoke about the same topic on the Ayn Rand Institute podcast. So you can catch Anka's thoughts and Ben's thoughts on the Ayn Rand Institute podcast that was this morning. You are spoiled with riches of the amount of commentary you're getting these days about the events of the day. All right, we have, let's change the goal. What the hell? Since you guys got us where we are, let's try to get us the next milestone. Let's see, Vadim came in with $400. Wow, no wonder we are easily at our target. Vadim came in with $400, so let's see what Vadim has to say. Hi, Yaron. I remember you recommended The Theory of Money by von Mises. I got the book, but I find it incredibly hard to read. Very small font. Do you commend any particular edition? What would be your major criticism of von Mises? My guess is perhaps his compartmentalization between morality and reality. I'm trying to think in terms of what I have. This is not small print, so I have this edition. If you can see it, I can't. Let me just move the screen. The Theory of Money and Credit by Ludwig von Mises. It's by Liberty Classics, and the font is not small. Whoops! But the book breaks apart. Shit! I just opened it, and it's already ripped. So be careful how you read it. It's going to fall apart, but the font at least is very readable. So that's with regard to that. With regard to my major criticism of Mises, it's primarily, I mean, I worry less about the morality and reality because, I mean, he's an economist. He's not a moralist. He's not a philosopher. He's not a moral philosopher. I think when he tries to be, that's where I think he's bad. When he tries to be philosophical, when he talks about human action in human action, when he talks about praxeology, I think that's his weakest point. The other thing is methodological. He's too deductive. He's too, in that sense, rationalistic. He's the greatest economist who ever lived, a mind like nobody else in terms of economics. But he is too Kantian, basically, philosophically. And, you know, he pretends to be deducing everything when it's obvious much of his is inductive. But so this is why it's hard to read. It's hard to read because it's not easy to understand because of the way it's delivered. And it's delivered in a deductive, rationalistic kind of way without a lot of examples, inductions, and seeing it playing, you know, integrating it from reality. So he has an axiom, and he tries to derive everything from the axiom. Now, it happens that he's too good of an economist not to do that, you know, not to fudge that so that it ultimately comes out good, but and true economically. But that's my biggest criticism is his methodology. If you read Menger was the founder of the Austrian school. I think Menger is much, much better. Menger's methodology is much more Aristotelian, much more reality-oriented, much more inductive rather than deductive. You know, anyway, so that would be a criticism. And so deductive and, in that sense, hard. And in Human Action, at least, the book Human Action, too much praxeology. He could have skipped the first 70 pages or so of the praxeology and just given us the economics. All right, we've got a couple of $100 questions. Dave says, I'm in a coffee shop outside Columbia now. It is egregious. Parents paying six figures so their kids can turn the entire campus into Occupy Wall Street. These demonstrators have so much conviction until they're confronted. We will be heard. Don't talk to us. Yeah, I mean, these are not people who believe in speech, free or otherwise. These are people who are authoritarians. They love Hamas. Hamas doesn't believe in free speech. These are not people who want to have a conversation or want to have a debate or want to have a dialogue. These are people who just want to yell. They ultimately want physical force. They're little Nazis, little fascists, little authoritarians who just want destruction. It's not about an intellectual movement. The so-called intellectual ideas behind it are basically nihilism and completely focused on disintegration, mindlessness. Now, I don't feel sorry for the parents. I don't feel sorry for the parents. If the parents are paying six figures and their kids are out demonstrating, then the parents should pull the kid from the university and stop paying the tuition. And to the extent that the parents don't, that the parents don't monitor, that the parents don't care, that the parents are proud of their kids for demonstrating or whatever. I'm sure Oma, her kid was suspended from Berkeley. I'm sure she's very proud. Then they deserve it. They deserve it. So parents who are conscientious, parents who actually follow their kids' education and care about their kids' education, would pull the kid out, would stop paying the tuition. That's what would happen. So not worried about the parents. I'm worried about the parents of the kids who would like to get an education, who are not part of the demonstration, the vast majority of students at Columbia, and who are prevented from getting an education because of this. And those parents should be out demonstrating at Columbia against the administration for allowing this to happen, for, what do you call it, depreciating the educational quality that their kids are getting because they don't have the guts, the courage, the integrity, but also the intellectual fortitude, the ideas to stand up to these little nihilists. Right? So it's the parents. I mean, and then again, pull the kid from Columbia. They're not getting good education in Columbia. Look at what the education in Columbia is worth. Look at these professors standing with these nihilistic students. Pull your kid out of Columbia, send them somewhere else. That's the solution. That's what'll work. That's the only thing that'll work. So, Harper Campbell. Do conservatives and free market types tend to exaggerate how generous welfare benefits are? They make it sound like people are living like kings off these programs, when in reality, they're just getting by. Does exaggerating how lucrative they are hurt our cause? I haven't heard people exaggerate. I mean, I remember a long time ago, they talked about welfare queens. But I think that was in the 90s. I think after Bill Clinton, of all people, really significantly tightened the regulations around welfare, made it more difficult to get welfare, made requirements around welfare more stringent. That, you know, I think that rhetoric about welfare queens, about people making a lot of money, has gone away. Now, it is true that if you're in welfare and you can just barely get by, and now somebody offers you a job where you can just barely get by, you're not going to take the job. I mean, you basically now have to work for the same income where you didn't have to work. And in some cases, welfare actually provides greater income in total with the benefits and everything else than a job. So sometimes taking a job involves actually going down in the standard of living, quality of life. But I really don't hear much of they're living like kings and queens. I don't hear much about that. Definitely happened in the 90s, but I think it's gone. So if you got some examples of that where conservatives and free market types do that, then I'd like to see it, but I haven't seen it in recent times. Welfare, get by, but so does a minimum wage job. But all those people on welfare should be on minimum wage jobs. They shouldn't be on welfare. And if they weren't on welfare, they'd be incentivized to take the minimum wage job. And to see a minimum wage job is a way out. There's a path. Welfare, there's no path. Welfare is a dead end. And that's what makes welfare so disastrous. All right. James, two $50 questions. A note of optimism. Even though shoplifting and not paying rent have been legalized in almost every major city, these cities still function relatively well because the vast majority of people pay their rent and don't shoplift. Part 2. It's like during the Great Society, where welfare was first being introduced. Progressives were upset that most people weren't taking the free money. They didn't factor in individual pride into their formula for implementing dependency. I think that's right. That wasn't during the Great Society. That was more during the New Deal in the 1930s. I think by the time of the Great Society, a lot of that pride had dissipated, and a lot more people were taking advantage of it than had during the New Deal. But I think it's a great point. The reality is most people don't shoplift, not just most people. An overwhelming majority of people don't shoplift. And indeed, an overwhelming majority of people, don't want free stuff. Even quite a few poor people are much more interested in finding ways to work and get themselves up by the bootstraps. Again, let me just note as an aside, I know you guys will hate me for it. This is primarily true of immigrants. The shoplifters and the moochers are not primarily immigrants. They came here to work. They came here to make a better living. And here I include, maybe more so than anyone, the illegal immigrants. They want to work. We just need to make it easy for them. But yeah, I mean, the reality is, again, I was just in New York, spent a couple of days in New York. Wow, what a city. I was in this office on the 50-something floor, maybe higher. No, I'm not sure what floor it was. But the most magnificent view of New York City I'd ever seen, ever. Literally, you were looking down at the Chrysler Building. Down at the Chrysler Building. You were looking right to the top of the Empire State Building. You could see, yesterday was a beautiful day in New York. You could see all of Manhattan, everything, right? All the way down to downtown, to the so-called Freedom Tower, all the way up beyond the park to Harlem. I mean, an unbelievable view, 360. So they had the whole floor, and you went all around. Just, I think the most impressive view I've ever seen in New York, ever. It was another thing that struck me in New York this time is there's still construction. I don't know what they're building, because everything I read about is the vacancies in office building, and yet there's a massive, very tall office building being built right next to Grand Central. And it's huge, and I think it's office buildings. The other buildings that are being built, all tall buildings, look like residential, and that's good because New York needs a lot more residential, which will lower the prices ultimately and make living in New York more affordable. But, I wasn't expecting to see as many cranes as I did in a city that pretty much everybody on the chat here has declared dead, and a city where the office vacancies are as high as they are, and yet there's building and there's a lot of renovation going on, a lot of renovation of buildings. I think a lot of conversion of hotels to apartments, to condos, again, which is great because it'll lower the cost of housing. So, some real dynamism, people in the streets, yeah, it was exciting. And of course, I got to meet some of the most successful people in America. So, yeah, yes, in spite of all the bad stuff, in spite of Bragg being one of the worst district attorneys one can imagine in any city, New York is not completely out of control. And the place is not unlivable, in spite of what some people in the chat say. And yeah, it is interesting because at the end of the day, the people who pay the bills, the people who actually count, are not engaged in these activities. A vast majority of Americans are hardworking, and they don't want stuff for free. They want to pay for the stuff they get. They want their city or their town to be clean, and they want it to be crime-free. And I think in a vast majority, almost everywhere in this country, including the big cities, Governments, local governments that don't provide them with that are going to be voted out. You can see that already in San Francisco, and the challenges, the really big challenges that the city council there and the mayor there are having, and what's going to happen in their next election. All right, Michael. You notice children are much happier because, also $50, thank you, Michael, because they have less negative self-talk going on in their minds. How much does internal negative dialogue hold people back compared to the actual external corruption and irrationality in the world? Oh no, I mean, people hold themselves back more than the culture holds them back. The negative dialogue, the low self-esteem, the low confidence, the hesitancy to act, to take risk, to be bold, to live with that capital L that I talk about, to really embrace life and to go for it. That's what holds people back. I mean, the external world can make it harder. It can make it more difficult when it's not going your way. But at the end of the day, your life is in your hands. You get to shape it. And a lot of that has to do with your attitude towards living and towards life and towards what you are capable of, towards what you can do, what you can achieve. And so I think that internal dialogue, is the overwhelming factor. And of course, the more people are negative, the less they do, the more bitter they become, the more resentful they become, the more nihilistic they become, the more hateful of the world they become. That manifests in politics. That politics then makes the world harder to do stuff in. But it starts with that low view of oneself, that low self-esteem. John, thank you for the sticker. I know there have been a bunch of other stickers that I haven't had a chance to thank you for. Also, a few. There were others, but I just noticed that Nate, whose answer I will get to later, this is his 5th super chat, so thank you, Nate. I really, really appreciate the support. All right, we've still got more $20 questions. We've got a bunch of $2 to $10 questions. We're just a little short of $1,000. It would be cool if we made $1,000 today. Make up for the fact there was there were some shows where we didn't make as much to get to our average, to get to about right for the month. Let's see. Not your average algorithm. Netanyahu just put out a video condemning these blatantly anti-Semitic pro-Hamas college takeovers. Are many university professors secret anti-Semites? I mean, yes, but anti-Semitism is a symptom of something larger. It is a symptom of collectivism and hatred of success and good. I mean, why are Jews hated? Really from the beginning of time, but certainly in modern times. What is the cause of what I call modern anti-Semitism? Of anti-Semitism starting, let's say, in the 19th century and certainly leading to the Germans. There are 2 reasons why Jews are hated. One, they're different. Different holidays, different habits, maybe during certain periods of time they dress differently, they live differently, during certain periods of time they had the separate language. They're different. And they've been identified as different. And second, they're successful. If they were different and unsuccessful, nobody would care about them. So professors, are there a significant number of professors who are ultimately anti-Semitic? Yes, but that is not their primary. Their primary is intersectionality. Their primary is hatred of success. Their primary is success equals oppressor. And the anti-Semitism comes from, look at those Jews. Everywhere they go, they're successful. I mean, by the way, same thing, same rationale, same logic on the right. This is why this is so scary. What is our alternative to this? Tucker Carlson kind of anti-Semitism. So, yes, there are a lot of them. And It comes from their philosophy, which is hatred of America, hatred of the West, and the one hatred we haven't talked about, which is key, hatred of capitalism. Hatred of capitalism, which fundamentally means hatred of freedom. They hate individual freedom. They cannot abide by individual freedom. What they worship is collectivism, is groupthink, is the identity of the group. What they reject is the individual and his mind. That's the fundamental. That's the essential. And that leads them to be anti-Semitic. It's not that they start, I hate Jews, now let's build a system around that. No, their philosophy, their ideology, their collectivism, their hatred of the West leads them to be anti-Semitic. Benjamin, thank you. Thank you for the support, and thank you for your third super chat. Again, YouTube is feeding me these numbers. I think they recognize certain milestones. All right, Stephen Harper. Captcha tests are getting harder to exclude robots. Article on first page of today's Wall Street Journal. Doesn't tell us how to elude them. I just switched my VPN location from the US to another country and switch it back in a couple of days. So that allows you to get rid of the what? The robots or the Captcha, or what exactly? I'm not sure I understand why the VPN switching locations makes a difference. How does that, who is that fooling, and how is that fooling them? If you want to answer me in the chat, then that would be great. Andrew, anger has an important role in the emotional spectrum in moral expression. Absolutely. Righteous anger. Has Christianity suppressed people's anger response? And if so, what do you think are the consequences of that suppression? Yes. I mean, I think Christianity and modern society don't judge, which is a principle only God can judge, which is a principle in Christianity. But I also think just the idea that your emotions are grounded in the sinful part of your nature. They're grounded in the material part of your nature, and therefore should be suppressed. And that's true of all emotions, anger only being one. It's certainly true of your sexuality, so sex being another. I think they lead to a variety of pathologies. I'm not a psychologist, but they lead to bottled up rage that then that hatred comes out, that anger comes out as rage, as something out of control. The sexual repression comes out in all kinds of ways, antagonism to sex, but also maybe various forms of unhealthy sex, from promiscuity to abstinence, which I think are both unbelievably unhealthy, to violence. Is it an accident that priests molest children? No. It's a consequence of repression of sexual desires. And then they bubble up in an unhealthy way, in an unhealthy place. So yes, I think the consequence of suppression are unhealthy psychology, a very unhealthy psychology. The emotions, you must feel them, you must acknowledge them, you must identify them. Even if their source is irrational, if you've got to recognize them, and only then can you deal with them. Suppressing those emotions is suppressing you. It's suppressing your response nature, and it turns you against you. All right. Michael, does irrationality boil down to randomness? No. Irrationality boils down to not engaging. It boils down to not thinking. It boils down to evading. It boils down to the negation of something, not engaging with the world, not engaging your mind in a process called reason, called rationality, not engaging in that process. Liam, are these constant indictment of Trump a form of election tampering? I don't think it's election tampering. It's, I certainly think, well, look, you can't bunch them all together. Some of them I think are justified. What he did with the documents, completely justified. His attempt to overturn the election in Georgia, probably justified. January 6th, I mean, probably justified. Certainly justifies never voting for him for president. Whether, legally that's an issue, it's certainly reasonable to take him to court over that. This lawsuit, silly. Even the fraud lawsuit, in the way it was prosecuted by a prosecutor who committed to going after Trump, it looks like just inequality before the law and harassment. But it's not election tampering per se. It's certainly trying to impact the election, but it's not tampering. Tampering is you're actually tampering with the results, with what's going on. And the fact is, it's not working. That is, it seems like Trump gets more popular the more he's indicted. I admit that. Hope to God that Ben Shapiro is right about Trump. Depends on who whispers in his ears. Gaza must be destroyed. I don't know what Ben Shapiro said, but yeah, it clearly changes weekly with Trump, right? I mean, he was very anti-aid to Ukraine, and then he was very pro-aid to Ukraine. He was wanted to shut down TikTok. He initiated it. He was the guy with the first idea to do it. Now he's against shutting down TikTok. So completely random, completely unprincipled, completely dependent on who spoke to him last. I don't know who's going to speak to him. I don't know who's going to be the whisperer, in his second administration. So you're taking a big risk because you have no idea what he actually stands for. And you have no idea what kind of people he's going to surround himself with. And one thing we do know is that for the most part, the people he's surrounded with the first time were much better than the people he's going to surround himself the second time. Just because, the people he surrounded himself the first time landed up being relatively independent thinkers. You can see that by how they criticized him. The next round are going to be yes men. And who knows what that leads to. Apollo, the videos, not the songs, from the objectivist perspective, Robert Palmer, Addicted to Love versus Shania Twain Man, I Feel Like a Woman. Your thoughts? Oh, God. I don't think I know Robert Palmer's Addicted to Love. I probably do know, but you'd have to sing it to me. I like Shania Twain's Man, I Feel Like a Woman. I think that's a great song. I mean, it's a fun song. I don't know, but great. That one I know for some reason. But even there, I know like the main verse. I don't know the whole song. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to listen to them, and that'll cost you. Andrew, sure, fight Chinese wrongdoing, but if the U.S. was just being more capitalistic, China would not be a big worry, as we'd be so far ahead. As we copy China's system, we close the gap between us. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're fighting China the way China fights us, right? They ban social media. We ban social media. They lock everybody down during COVID. We lock everybody down during COVID. They subsidize their favorite industries. We subsidize our favorite industries. They have tariffs. We have tariffs. So China won. I said this during COVID. China won. Everybody wants to be China now. We gave up on capitalism. Certainly we gave up even on a semblance of capitalism during the financial crisis. There is literally no political party today that advocates for even the semblance of capitalism. And what are we left with? We're left with all kinds of variations of statism that all want to be China. All admire Xi and his central planning to one extent or another. Apollo Zeus, when are you doing the female sculpture show that you promised me? I promised you? Well, you know, to guarantee that I do it is $1,000. $1,000, you can sponsor a show, you can tell me what topic, you can dictate the subject, and I'll do it. $1,000 gets it done. If you're in a hurry. Otherwise, you're just going to have to wait it out. It'll probably be a members-only show. Those are the kind of shows that work well as member-only shows. Jada, what is cultural racism? And do you think objectivists have a tendency to be culturally homogeneous in a racist way? I don't know what cultural racism is. I have no idea. I mean, discriminating against cultures you don't like, but then why racism? Racism is about race. Cultural elitism, maybe? I don't know. Do I think objectivists have a tendency to be culturally homogeneous? I don't even know what that means in a racist way. I just have no idea what you're talking about. So you'd have to spell it out for me. I don't understand any of this terminology. Objectivists believe that there is good culture and bad culture. Objectivists believe that some culture is better than others, that some cultures are barbaric and some cultures are civilized. And we are pro good cultures and hate bad cultures. That's what I can say. Michael, censorship is the tool used when the lie loses its power. Yeah, I think that's right. It's what the bad guys use when they can't, the lie is not enough for them. Drewski, did you catch the news that Governor Brian Kemp signed several healthcare related bills reforming Georgia's Certificate of Need law? No, I haven't. I'll look that up. I have to see what these laws are. I hope they're good. But I like Kemp. I mean, all of the people who got excited about, what's his name in Florida, Kemp was the one who opened up first during COVID. I remember Trump criticizing Kemp for opening up before he got permission from Trump. So Kemp was the first one to open up a state during COVID. And generally, Kemp he's still religious and all that, but he seems much more reasonable than many, and he stood up to Trump about election interference. I actually like Kemp. I wish Kemp had run against Trump. Maybe he could have beat him. Probably not. Maybe he was smart not to do it and wait until 4 years from now. But yes, I'll look it up. Michael, is life more of a mirror than a window? I don't think life is a mirror or window. Certainly not a mirror. You're not looking back at your own reflection. You're not just inside your own head. But it's not a window either, because a window is way too passive. I don't like those metaphors. Michael, does a man without a vision always return to his past? Yeah, it depends what you mean by vision. I don't like these. I've told you this before. I don't like these one-sentence things that are supposed to be profound. Usually I don't find them profound. Life is much more subtle, interesting than these one-sentence kind of aphorisms or whatever they're called. Paul, why these limousine liberals are enamored with Marxist ideology? Leonard Bernstein raised a fundraiser for the Black Panthers, and Ethel Kennedy named her dog Che. Have a photo of it of him at her home, because they feel guilty, because they believe that the left, that socialism, the Marxism, the communism, the egalitarianism of all its forms is noble and good. It might not be practiced right. it might be difficult to put into reality, to put into action, but it's fundamentally good. And the reason is because they take altruism seriously. They take their philosophy seriously. They take ideas seriously. And they know that altruism is just, is right, is good, is virtue. And if altruism is good and virtuous, then the left are good, even if sometimes their actions don't, quote, reflect that. That's how they think. And since they live relatively self-interested lives, they express that view of goodness of altruism in their charity, in the guilt that they feel, and in the heroes that they worship. Leonard Bernstein lived a pretty self-interested life, much of his life. So he had to express his altruism elsewhere. And that's how he did it. Liam, what do you gain from having dishonest, delusional trolls have free reign in the chat? Nothing. I have a new policy about people in the chat. I'm ignoring them. So I'm really going to ignore them. I looked a lot more at the camera today. I didn't follow the chat. I really don't care like what Richard thinks. It's of no value. And I suggest you do the same thing. I just don't find it useful to start banning people and blocking people, and it's just and then it becomes that becomes the issue. Just ignore them. Just pretend they're not there. You don't need to engage them. I mean, I'm going to stop engaging with them. So you're not going to hear me talk about Scott and all these guys, because I'm just not going to, because they're not helpful, not useful. They don't promote any value in the show. But I also don't, the time spent on blocking people, what for? You guys do it. You guys do it. You can block them from your chat, right? You can not see their posts, and I'm going to ignore them on my end, and all is good. Paul, during a debate with the Palestinian sympathizer, there was a section of Jews who were supposedly claimed they were involved in atrocities. What is your opinion of that? Were they lying? It's hard to tell. So there's no question that certain accusations against Jewish massacres in 1948 are just straight up lies, and they've been shown to be lies. So some of them are just fabrications. And there's been a lot of literature written on the fabrications. So this is not just speculation, it's not what we think. People have done the research, and yeah, a lot of it is fabricated. Now, there are still cases, very few by the way, one or two, where there might have been a unprovoked acts of violence against civilians among the Palestinians. Again, it was war, so it's not exactly. And it's funny because why doesn't anybody talk about? And this is curious. I'm curious. Maybe you guys can tell me. Why doesn't anybody talk about the massacres of Jews by the Palestinians or by the Jordanians or the Egyptians? I talked about this in the debate about one of them in Gush Etzion in 1948 by the Jordanian army. They had gotten fierce resistance by this cluster of Israeli settlements, and ultimately the people who lived there gave up, hands up, white flag. They were literally all massacred. They were, after they gave it up, handed over their weapons, shot. All of them were just shot. And that's not in dispute. Nobody actually disputes that. There's no historical document that says, no, this didn't happen. Because nobody cares when Arabs slaughter, massacre Jews. Nobody says, oh, no, that didn't happen. They go, yeah, okay, well, go, move on. What else is there? Nothing you see here. Because, it's really this attitude of, well, we don't expect much from them, which is racist. So there is a at least one case that is well documented of what appears to be well documented of a massacre. But even there, I came across a book by an Israeli scholar who claims that even that is being massively exaggerated and didn't actually happen. So maybe I wouldn't put it past. What is exactly a massacre? Well, when you've given up and everybody's shot, that's a massacre. That, as far as I know, never happened. Jews doing to Arabs, plenty of times Arabs doing to Jews. People lie, people make stuff up. They're trying to, and because they know that if they can show the Jews massacred, people care. If we show Arabs massacred like October 7th, nobody cares. Yeah, just Arabs. So a lot of energy is spent on dredging up any questionable thing that might have been done. And look, in wars, stuff happens. So I think it's quite possible, one or two cases where civilians were gratuitously shot, but it's not unequivocal in terms of even there, some people have raised questions. But I'd say likely, a couple of places. But the example he gave, the documentary he was playing, filled with lies, made up. Why do people lie? For lots of reasons. Equal to reality. I am glad my uncle is retired, so he is no longer teaching this monstrous junk. He has been very silent over Israel-Gaza. Yeah, I mean, these are the professors. By the way, many of those professors are Jews who are now having to face the reality of what they have wrought on the world. Nate, are stocks issued by companies don't pay dividends a Ponzi scheme? No. There's no financial connection between the value of the stock and the company itself, no intrinsic value. There absolutely is. The stock price is based in the long run over on the free cash flow that these businesses generate, over the dividends that they could pay if they paid them. The assumption is ultimately every company will pay a dividend. Shareholders don't want a company to pay dividends in the early years when they can more prudently invest the money than the shareholder can. So you want managers to investing your money at that point. You only want a mature business to give dividends. And indeed, as, for example, big tech, early on, big tech didn't do dividends. As they matured, they do dividends. And sometimes they do stock buybacks, which are, from a tax perspective, better than dividends. But no, it's not a Ponzi scheme at all. And absolutely, the stock is tied to the value of the free cash flow that the business is generating. The expectation of free cash flow that the business will generate in the future, to be more accurate. You have to take my finance class. Wolf Virgo, will you do a review of the Matt Brewing debate? I thought he raised some interesting points regarding GDP per hour worked in Nordic countries. I'll probably look at the GDP per hour. I think there's something to be said for the Nordic countries being more productive in that sense than America. And I think the explanation for that is what I said during the debate, although he kind of poo-pooed it, which is, and the more I read about this, the more it's true, that the Nordic countries are less regulated than the US is. And as a consequence, labor is more productive. Less regulations, higher productivity. Also, Sweden, for example, has no capital gains taxes. No capital gains taxes, which means that they reward capital investment, which means, again, increased productivity. So the more you look closely at the Nordic countries and the fact that they are less regulated and don't tax capital, it makes sense that they would be more productive per hour worked. By the way, their taxes are less progressive than the American system. So their taxes are flatter. More people pay taxes. In America, 50% of the population doesn't pay taxes, basically. In Scandinavia, almost everybody pays taxes. So in a lot of respects, maybe the tax rates are much higher, but in a lot of respects, and that's not even true if you live in California or New York, but in a lot of respects, which country is freer from an economic perspective? Sweden or the United States? Like, if you look at economic freedom indexes, where they try to put a number to the level of economic freedom, who has, neocon says Sweden has a 30% capital gains tax. I just read in this book that they don't have capital gains tax. I mean, it'll be bad if this book is wrong. Yeah, you're right. Capital gains tax is 30% on your property sale. 22. If you paid interest on loans or mortgages during the year, you're entitled to a tax deduction. Huh. All right, I have to figure out what the guy was talking about because I read in a book Sweden had no capital gains tax, and it's wrong. Who do you think is freer when you look at government spending, government deficits, taxes, regulations, labor, all of these issues? Who's freer, Sweden or the United States? It's actually not even close in terms of ranking. Sweden ranks in the top 10 most free countries in the world, economically. Denmark is actually higher on the scale than Sweden is. And the United States is number 15. It's in the second 10. Sweden is freer than the United States, so it's not surprising that labor would be more productive. I do need to get a bottom of this capital gains issue. Why this author said it was 0. That's not right. All right. Stephen, as soon as I switch my VPN to another country, the Captcha messages disappear and do not reappear for a few months. Then I just change VPN again. Oh, that's cool. I'll have to try that. Christian, can sex work be a rational choice? Asking because some years ago, Clara Morgan had a picture of hers with Atlas Shrugged. She's a former porn actress, turned TV host, singer, and entrepreneur. I mean, this is going to be controversial, but I think, can it be a rational choice? Yes, absolutely. But it has to be, a pretty specific set of circumstances that make it such. For whom is it a rational choice? It depends what your alternatives are, what your options are, what kind of psychology you have. But look, if you're poor and struggling in a society where this might be the only way to get out. Or I saw this movie, I think it was a true story. It's set in Venice, I think in the 16th or 15th or 14th century, something like that, a long, long time ago. And it's about a woman who is not allowed to get educated, is not allowed to live her life on her terms. I think she was interested in art and science and all these things. Wasn't allowed to do any of that. She was expected to get married and serve her husband, and she was banned from doing all these other things. Unless she became a courtesan. And as a courtesan, i.e. a prostitute, nobody cared what she did. She could do anything. So I think that's a circumstance in which being a sex worker makes sense. So, I can't rule it out. Whether it's rational or not depends on the context, on the circumstances, on the options available, on are you focused on reality, including the reality of sex and reality of your own nature and reality of the sexual act and everything else. Are you focused on that, or are you evading and deluding and pretending and doing all that? All right, I remind everybody that we are sponsored by the Ayn Rand Institute. You can still register for OCON. You can do so at aynrand.org/start here. It's a great event. Everybody should be at OCON. It's just a fabulous social and intellectual event. It's a highlight of the year from an objectivist perspective. And then Alex Epstein also is a sponsor. And Alex, of course, runs... Troy. All right, I'm going to get to that. Troy just came in with a question, 500 Australian dollars. Thank you, Troy. So Alex Epstein also is a sponsor of the show, and he, of course, does energy talking points. I encourage you to sign up to his Substack and get those talking points. Also, he has Alex AI, which is just fascinating because you can ask the AI any questions about energy, environmentalism, climate change, and Alex answers you. The AI answers you, but with having been trained on Alex's thought. So fantastic resource. So sign up, alexepstein.substack.com, alexepstein.substack.com. All right, Troy, who rarely asks a question. Thank you, Troy. What are your thoughts on sport washing, where countries with pure human rights records fund prestigious sport events to improve their reputation? Should a line be drawn between an athlete's self-interest and them also having to consider broad morality issues such as those raised in these instances? For example, Saudi Arabia-backed Leave Golf Tour is one example. Or Qatar hosting the World Cup. Remember Qatar hosting the World Cup? And China hosting the Olympics? And Nazi Germany hosting the Olympics in the 1930s. So the Olympics has certainly been challenged. World Cup has been challenged. I think it's horrible. I think it's horrible that we separate athletics from morality and from politics. We should not. We should incorporate morality and our evaluation of nations into everything that we do. Judge. You should always be judging. And you should avoid sanctioning evil, sanctioning authoritarian regimes. This goes back to my argument about Hamas and Israel. Making a moral equivocation between them is elevating authoritarianism and denouncing freedom. So, absolutely, I am for deciding I will not go to country X and play tennis. I will not participate in the World Cup if it's held in this country. And that's a challenge for an individual athlete. It's a challenge for team sport as well. But if it's backed by your government, then it can be much less of a challenge. For example, when the U.S. boycotted the Olympics in Russia, when was that? In 1980. I wonder if they do it today with the invasion of Ukraine. I wonder if there was an Olympic right now, they'd be boycotting. So I believe in those boycotts. But look, this is a much bigger issue, right? And the bigger issue is that we live in a culture and in a political world that does not judge. We have diplomatic relations with these monstrous regimes. Our president goes and visits them and dances with their sheiks. We bow to them. We grovel before them. I'm thinking Obama, Trump, Biden, all of them. So it's very difficult for an athlete, particularly if you're representing his country. He's going to say, I'm not going to Saudi Arabia. I'm not allowing Saudi Arabia to own this when my president goes and sucks up to them. So it's very, very difficult to judge people harshly when everything in the culture tells them, oh, no. It's completely normal to have authoritarian thugs. It's completely normal for the Saudis to stone women to death. It's completely normal for them to send an atheist to jail for the rest of his life. No big deal. And now I'm an athlete saying, no, it is a big deal. I'm not going to go to Saudi Arabia. That takes a lot of courage. And that would be unexpected. That would be unexpected. So we need a culture that judges. It says, I'm not going to go as a tourist to Saudi Arabia. I'm not going to do business with Saudi Arabia. And as a political entity, I'm not going to recognize the validity of a regime in Saudi Arabia. And in such a world, the sports would that would be natural. There wouldn't be a World Cup in Qatar. And nobody would play for the Saudi-backed Leave Golf Tour because it would be obvious that you don't endorse evil. We live today in a gray world, in a world where people are endorsing evil all the time, where our leaders, the people we look up to, both in business and in politics, completely sanction these people. I mean, it would be great if we had a list from the State Department, right? Our government, free countries, semi-free countries, authoritarian thugs, and we could adjust our behavior based on that. But we knew that our government adjusted its behavior, business adjusted its behavior. This was just part of our culture, was to judge these other countries. Imagine the president of the university saying, no, October 7th is horrific, Hamas are evil, Israel's a civilized place, it's problematic, they do things I don't like, but it's a civilized place. Can't compare the two, not on the same moral landscape. But our university presidents won't say that. So expect that from athletes is too much. But I hate watching a soccer tournament in Qatar. I hate the idea of the sports engaging in sanctioning some of the most evil regimes on the planet. We don't, but I don't see sports as leading the way here. Can't imagine sports leading the way. Hopefully that answered your question. Troy, again, thank you for the support. Really, really, really appreciate it. And Stav says, just got my scholarship via your link. See you there. So he got a scholarship to Okan. So he will be coming to Okan. So you too could have applied, but I think the deadline was April 15th. And he got the scholarship through the link through this show. Me letting you know about the link. All right, everybody, almost 3 hours. Thank you. Wow, we had a phenomenal day in terms of the amount of money we raised, thanks to Vadim and to Troy, who both gave $300+, and thanks to James, who gave $100, and Michael, who gave 50+, and Hopper Campbell gave 100, and David gave 100, actually more because they also asked other questions. So thank you guys, really, really appreciate it. I will, this is the new format. We're still playing around with it. It might be different on different days. Sometimes there'll be a clear break. Sometimes it'll all be news. We'll do this in different ways, but this is basically the new format. Andrew says, remember Safe saying, who are you to condemn? What do you make of that? Doesn't he condemn Israel constantly? Yes, he does. But who am I to condemn the oppressed? Who am I to condemn the weak, the meager? But who am I? Who am I? Right? So yes, he was trying to play a double game. They all do, where he doesn't get to condemn the actions of Hamas. All right. Thank you, guys. I will see you all tomorrow, 2 p.m. East Coast time, and also on Friday, 2 p.m. East Coast time. See you guys. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed the show. See you tomorrow.